When a hungry boy walked into the diner, her decision cost her everything. On a cold, rainy morning in Detroit, a tired waitress named Maya Carter served a quiet old man the cheapest breakfast on the menu. When he left, he placed an $8 tip on the table, just enough to test her character. But seconds later, through the diner window, he watched her give that money away to someone who needed it more. In that moment, the man went silent, because the small act he witnessed would soon change both of their lives forever. Rain had been falling over Jefferson Avenue since before sunrise, the kind that didn't roar, but whispered steadily against windows and pavement. Detroit mornings like that felt gray all the way through, as if the sky itself hadn't decided whether it wanted to wake up. Maya Carter pushed open the glass door of Jefferson Street Diner just before 6 a.m., the bell above it chiming softly. The warmth inside wrapped around her instantly. Coffee brewing, bacon sizzling, the quiet hum of an old refrigerator somewhere in the back. She paused for a second to wipe the rain off her jacket sleeve. Her sneakers squeaked slightly against the black and white checkered floor as she stepped in. "Morning, Maya," called Frank from behind the counter. Frank had owned the diner for nearly 30 years. His gray mustache twitched as he poured pancake batter onto the griddle. "Morning," Maya replied, tying the faded red apron around her waist. The place wasn't fancy. Half the booths had cracked vinyl seats patched with duct tape. The neon coffee sign in the window buzzed like it was tired of being alive. But the diner had something rare in the city: warmth. Outside, buses hissed to a stop. Headlights cut through the drizzle. Workers in construction jackets stomped water from their boots as they passed by. Maya grabbed a coffee pot and started preparing the morning tables. At 27, she moved with the quiet rhythm of someone used to long days. Her dark curls were pulled into a loose bun, and her smile came easily even when she was tired, which lately was most days. Her phone buzzed softly inside her apron pocket. She didn't check it. She already knew what it was. Another message from the hospital billing department. Another reminder that her mother's heart medication cost more than Maya made in a week. Frank slid a plate across the counter. "You okay today?" Maya nodded quickly. "Always." Frank didn't press. He knew better. The bell above the diner door rang again. Maya looked up. An older man stepped inside slowly, bringing a swirl of cold air and rain with him. His coat was dark and worn, the kind that had seen too many winters. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and water dripped quietly from the edge of his hat. He didn't look homeless, but he didn't look comfortable either. He glanced around the diner briefly, as if measuring the room. Then he chose the booth closest to the window. Maya walked over with the coffee pot. "Good morning," she said gently. The man nodded once. "Morning." His voice was low, calm. Maya poured coffee into the chipped white mug sitting on the table. "Can I get you something to eat?" He looked down at the menu for a long moment. "The cheapest breakfast," he finally said. Maya smiled softly. "That'd be the eggs and toast." "That'll do." There was something about him she couldn't quite place. Not sadness exactly, more like weight. The kind some people carried after losing something they never got back. She brought his food 10 minutes later. He thanked her quietly and ate slowly, like someone not used to being in a hurry. Outside, rain streaked across the window beside him. The diner began filling with the usual morning crowd. Construction workers, bus drivers, a nurse from Detroit Mercy Hospital who always ordered oatmeal. But the older man stayed quiet in his booth. When he finished, he folded his napkin carefully beside the plate. Maya walked over. "Ready for the check?" "Yes." The bill came to $6.25. He handed her exact cash. Then he reached into his wallet again. For a brief moment, his eyes lifted toward her. Not in the way some men looked at waitresses. There was no expectation there, only quiet observation. He placed something on the table, a folded bill. Then he stood. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." He walked toward the door without another word. The bell chimed as he stepped back into the rain. Maya picked up the bill and plate. She unfolded the money. $8. $8 in tip. She paused. $8 could buy a small bottle of her mom's medication from the pharmacy discount shelf. It could also buy dinner tonight. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Across the diner, Frank flipped another batch of pancakes. "Tips any good this morning?" he asked casually. Maya didn't answer. She was looking at the jar beside the register. A big glass jar labeled in crooked marker. Free Meal Fund. Frank had started it years ago. When someone couldn't afford breakfast, the jar paid for it. Some days it stayed empty. Some days people dropped in spare change. Maya held the $8 bill between her fingers. She glanced at the door. Rain blurred the street outside. Nobody was watching. She could keep it. Nobody would know. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. The hospital. Maya closed her eyes for a second. Then she exhaled slowly. "Somebody else probably needs it more," she whispered under her breath. She walked to the counter. Without hesitation, she slipped the $8 bill into the jar. The glass made a soft sound as it settled among the coins. Maya turned back toward the dining room and froze. Through the fogged diner window, she could see the older man standing beneath the awning outside. He hadn't left. Rain fell around him in silver streaks. He was looking directly at her, looking at the jar, looking at the place where the $8 had disappeared. His face didn't change much, but something in his eyes did. The kind of quiet shock that came when you saw something you thought no longer existed. Inside the diner, Maya picked up a coffee pot and kept working. She had no idea he had watched everything. Outside, the man stood perfectly still. His hand tightened slightly on the railing beside him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, barely above the sound of rain, he whispered a single name. "Eleanor." The word trembled like a memory. Inside the diner, Maya laughed softly with a customer and wiped down another table. She didn't know that the $8 she had just given away weren't really a tip, and she certainly didn't know that the quiet man standing in the rain had just seen something that would change both of their lives. Because in that moment, beneath the gray Detroit sky, an old billionaire had just witnessed something the world had almost convinced him no longer existed. A stranger who chose kindness, even when she couldn't afford it. And he wasn't ready to walk away just yet. Outside the Jefferson Street diner, rain slid down the glass like thin silver threads. The old man stood beneath the narrow awning, his hands resting lightly on the metal railing as cars passed through puddles along the avenue. From where he stood, he could still see inside. The young waitress, Maya Carter, moved from table to table with a quiet rhythm. She wiped a counter, poured coffee for a tired construction worker, then laughed gently at something an elderly couple said. Nothing about her looked extraordinary, and yet the $8 in the jar behind the counter seemed louder to him than the rain. He had seen something he hadn't expected to see anymore. Inside the diner, Maya carried a tray of toast toward a booth where two bus drivers were arguing about the Lions' latest game. "Y'all say that every season," she teased lightly. One of them laughed. "Girl, you just wait. This year we're winning something." Maya smiled, but her mind was somewhere else. $8. Her fingers brushed the edge of her apron pocket where her phone rested. She didn't check it again, because she already knew her mother's medicine, the pharmacy bill, rent due next week. And still, she had dropped the tip into the jar. Sometimes kindness hurt a little, but it felt worse not to choose it. Behind the counter, Frank wiped a coffee mug dry and glanced toward the window. "That guy still out there?" he muttered. Maya followed his gaze. The old man stood beneath the awning, unmoving. "Maybe he's waiting for someone," she said quietly. Frank squinted. Or maybe he forgot his umbrella. But the old man didn't look like someone waiting. He looked like someone remembering. Outside, the rain softened slightly. The old man finally stepped away from the awning and began walking slowly down Jefferson Avenue. His shoes splashed through shallow water. He passed a bus stop, a closed laundromat, and a pawn shop with flickering neon lights. Then he stopped again. Across the street, through the rainy haze, the diner's neon coffee sign glowed softly. He looked back toward it. For a moment, his shoulders sagged with the weight of years. "Kindness," he murmured. The word sounded strange on his tongue, as if he hadn't said it in a long time. Inside the diner, Maya stacked a pile of plates near the sink. Her coworker Denise rushed in through the back door, shaking water off her jacket. "You would not believe the bus this morning," Denise groaned. Maya laughed softly. "Detroit mornings." Denise grabbed a towel and leaned against the counter. "Did you hear what Rick did yesterday?" Maya's smile faded slightly. Rick Dalton, the diner's day manager. She hadn't seen him yet this morning, but she knew he'd be arriving soon. "What now?" Maya asked carefully. Denise rolled her eyes. "He's been checking tip reports again." Maya froze slightly. Rick had started doing that 2 months ago, scrutinizing every receipt, every cash tip. He said it was to prevent theft, but most of the waitresses knew the truth. Rick didn't trust them, especially Maya. Denise lowered her voice. "You know he already thinks you're too generous with that jar." Maya looked toward the free meal fund on the counter. Coins and a few small bills rested inside. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Maya said softly. Denise shrugged. "You know that. I know that." She nodded toward the door. "But Rick?" Right on cue, the bell above the diner entrance rang sharply. Rick Dalton stepped inside. Tall, broad shoulders, hair slicked back too perfectly. His eyes scanned the diner the way security cameras did, cold and calculating. "Morning," he said without warmth. Frank grunted a quiet greeting. Rick walked straight behind the counter and opened the register. His eyes flicked toward the jar, then toward Maya. "Busy morning?" he asked. "Pretty steady," she replied calmly. Rick folded his arms. "Good." His gaze dropped to the jar again. "How much is in there today?" Frank sighed quietly. "Rick, it's a charity jar." "I'm aware," Rick replied. But his eyes never left Maya. "Still," he continued, "money moving around the restaurant should be accounted for." Maya felt Denise tense beside her. The diner had gone strangely quiet. Rick walked to the counter and lifted the jar. Coins clinked. Then his fingers pulled out the newest bill. $8. He held it between 2 fingers. "Interesting," he said slowly. Maya's stomach tightened. Rick looked directly at her. "You get tipped this morning?" "Yes," Maya said honestly. "And you put it in here?" "Yes." Rick tilted his head. "You gave away your tip?" She nodded. Rick studied her face like he was searching for something. "Why?" Maya hesitated only a second. "Because someone else might need breakfast." A few customers glanced up from their tables. Rick chuckled softly. "Or maybe," he said, "you're trying to make yourself look good." Denise stepped forward. "That's not fair." Rick raised a hand. "I'm talking to Maya." He placed the $8 bill back into the jar. "Just remember," he said quietly, "this isn't a charity center. It's a business." Then he walked toward his office. The tension in the room slowly released. Denise let out a breath. "Guy's got a problem." Maya forced a small smile. "It's fine." But her chest felt tight. Across Jefferson Avenue, a black sedan had just parked quietly along the curb. The old man stepped out of the back seat. A driver closed the door behind him. The man looked once more toward the diner window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see Maya wiping the same table again and again, like she was trying to clear something heavier than crumbs. The old man spoke quietly to the driver. "Find out her name." The driver blinked slightly. "Yes, sir. And don't let anyone inside know." He looked back at the diner, at the young waitress who had given away the only tip he had left. The driver hesitated. "May I ask why, Mr. Whitmore?" The old man's expression grew distant. Because for the first time in years, someone had reminded him of his wife, of the woman who used to say kindness wasn't something you saved for when life was easy. You gave it away, especially when it wasn't. Daniel Whitmore watched the diner window for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Because I think that girl just passed a test she didn't even know she was taking." And inside the diner, Maya Carter had no idea that the man she served breakfast to was one of the richest men in Michigan, or that the $8 she gave away was only the beginning. The rain kept falling through late morning, turning Jefferson Avenue into a mirror of gray skies and blinking traffic lights. Inside the diner, the rush-hour crowd had begun to thin, leaving behind half-empty coffee mugs and the faint smell of bacon in the air. Maya wiped down the last booth near the window. The glass was still fogged from the warmth inside. Beyond it, the street blurred with movement, cars passing, umbrellas tilting against the wind, people rushing somewhere more important than breakfast. But the black sedan across the street had not moved. She didn't notice it. Not yet. At the counter, Rick Dalton was flipping through receipts with the focus of a man searching for mistakes. His pen tapped against the paper. Once. Twice. Then he looked up. "Maya." His voice carried across the diner. She walked over. "Yes?" Rick held up a receipt. "You served table 4 this morning." "Yes." He leaned back against the counter. "Did they tip you?" Maya nodded. "Yes." "And where did the tip go?" The question felt heavier this time. Maya glanced toward the glass jar beside the register, the free meal fund. Rick followed her gaze slowly. The jar sat there quietly under the soft yellow light of the ceiling lamp. $8 rested among coins and a couple of crumpled $1 bills. Rick walked over and picked it up again. "You know," he said, turning the jar slowly, "I've been thinking about this." Denise, who was refilling sugar packets nearby, stiffened slightly. Rick continued. "This jar wasn't part of the original diner setup." Frank looked up from the grill. "Because I added it," he said calmly. Rick shrugged. "Right. But lately it seems to be growing." He set the jar down with a soft clink. And generosity like that tends to attract problems. Maya felt the words land like quiet stones in her chest. "What kind of problems?" she asked. Rick smiled thinly. "People start expecting things." He leaned forward. "And businesses don't survive on expectations." Frank wiped his hands on a towel. "They survive on people feeling welcome," he said. Rick didn't answer him. His eyes stayed on Maya. "Just remember," he said quietly, "your job here is to serve customers, not play savior." The words lingered in the air. Maya lowered her eyes briefly. "Yes, sir." Rick nodded once, satisfied. Then he walked back toward his office. The door closed behind him. For a moment, the diner was silent except for the low hiss of the coffee machine. Denise exhaled sharply. "That guy needs a vacation." Frank shook his head. Or a heart. Maya forced a small smile. It's okay. But something inside her felt smaller now. She picked up a rag and started wiping the counter again. Across the street, inside the parked sedan, Daniel Whitmore watched through the windshield. His driver sat quietly in the front seat. You asked for her name, the driver said. Daniel didn't move his eyes from the diner window. Yes. Maya Carter. The name seemed to settle somewhere deep inside him. Maya, he repeated softly. The driver handed him a small tablet. I did a quick check. Daniel glanced down. Basic information filled the screen. Age 27, Detroit resident, waitress, part-time caregiver. Daniel's brow tightened slightly. Caregiver? Her mother, the driver explained. Heart condition, expensive treatment. Daniel looked back toward the diner. Through the fogged window, Maya was helping an elderly man adjust his chair. She spoke slowly, patiently, like she had all the time in the world. Does she know who you are? The driver asked. Daniel almost smiled. No. Inside the diner, the bell above the door rang again. A gust of cold air swept through as a thin teenage boy stepped inside. His hoodie was soaked from the rain. Water dripped from his sleeves onto the floor. He hovered near the entrance. Maya noticed immediately. She walked over. Hey there. The boy shifted nervously. I was just wondering. His voice trailed off. He glanced at the menu board but didn't step closer. Maya understood instantly. Are you hungry? She asked gently. The boy nodded once, but then he looked embarrassed. I don't got any money. Rick's office door creaked open slightly. Maya could feel his presence even without turning around. She kept her voice calm. Give me a second. She walked to the counter and picked up the jar. The coins and bills rattled softly. Frank watched silently. Maya reached inside. She pulled out $3. That'll cover eggs and toast, she said quietly. The boy's eyes widened. Really? She smiled. Really? Behind her, Rick's voice cut through the room. Maya. She turned slowly. Rick stood in the doorway of his office. His arms were crossed. Put the money back. The diner fell completely silent. The boy froze near the door. Maya held the $3 in her hand. It's the free meal fund, she said carefully. Rick stepped forward. That jar is not for random handouts. He's hungry. That's not our responsibility. Maya felt heat rising in her chest. She had heard those words before, many times. But something about the boy's soaked hoodie and tired eyes made the words harder to swallow. Rick extended his hand. Put the money back. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Frank spoke quietly from behind the counter. Rick. Rick didn't look at him. Frank wiped the grill slowly. Kid's just asking for breakfast. Rick's jaw tightened. This isn't a shelter. The boy lowered his head. It's okay, he muttered. I'll go. Maya's heart dropped. Without another word, she reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out the only cash she had left from yesterday. $5. She placed it on the counter. I'll pay for it, she said. Rick stared at the bill, then at her. You're working a double shift today. I know. Then maybe you should think about your own bills first. Maya didn't answer. She simply turned to the boy. Go sit down, she said gently. I'll bring your breakfast. The boy hesitated, then slowly walked to a booth near the window. Rick watched the entire exchange. His expression hardened. Across the street, Daniel Whitmore leaned forward slightly in his seat. Through the glass, he had seen everything. The argument, the jar, the $5 bill, the soaked boy sitting alone at the booth. Daniel's voice was quiet. She paid for him herself. The driver nodded. Yes, sir. Daniel leaned back slowly. His eyes remained on Maya as she carried a plate of eggs and toast to the boy. The diner lights reflected softly in the rain outside, and for the second time that morning, Daniel Whitmore saw the same thing. A kindness that cost her something. Not convenience, not spare change, something real, something painful. The driver glanced at him. What are you thinking, sir? Daniel Whitmore looked at the diner window for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. I think the test isn't finished yet. Inside the diner, Maya placed the plate in front of the boy. He stared at it like it was treasure. Thank you, he whispered. Maya smiled softly. You're welcome. But behind the counter, Rick Dalton was already writing something down in his notebook, and the way he looked at Maya now made it clear that kindness sometimes came with consequences. Consequences Maya Carter wasn't ready for. Not yet. The rain outside Jefferson Street Diner had slowed to a mist by early afternoon, but the gray sky still hung low over Detroit like a heavy blanket. Inside, the diner had fallen into the quiet lull between breakfast and the evening rush. The teenage boy sat in the booth by the window, carefully finishing the last bite of toast as if stretching the meal as long as possible. Maya stood at the coffee station polishing mugs, watching discreetly from the corner of her eye. She had seen that look before. The careful way someone ate when they weren't sure when the next meal might come. The boy finally wiped his mouth with a napkin and approached the counter slowly. Miss? He said. Maya turned. Yes? He pushed the empty plate slightly toward her. That was really good. She smiled gently. I'm glad. The boy hesitated. Then he reached into the pocket of his wet hoodie and pulled out something small. 3 crumpled coins. He placed them on the counter. It's all I got. Maya shook her head softly. You keep that. But the boy slid them forward anyway. My grandma says if someone helps you, you at least try. Frank, listening from the grill, looked up. His eyes softened. Maya slowly picked up the coins and dropped them into the jar. The soft clink echoed in the quiet diner. Well, she said warmly, now you helped someone else too. The boy smiled for the first time. A real smile. Then he grabbed his hood and stepped back out into the misty Detroit afternoon. The bell above the door rang softly behind him. For a moment, Maya watched the empty doorway. Sometimes kindness felt small, but sometimes it spread quietly. Across the diner, Rick Dalton closed his notebook. His pen stopped moving. He had watched the entire exchange. Without a word, he walked back into his office and shut the door. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. 2 minutes later, the door opened again. Maya. His voice was colder now. She turned. Yes? Rick stepped out holding a thin folder. Come here. Denise glanced up nervously from the register. Maya wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him. Rick didn't look angry. That almost made it worse. He opened the folder and pulled out a printed sheet. Do you know what this is? Maya looked down. Her stomach tightened. An employee conduct report. Rick tapped the paper. You gave away food today. Maya blinked. I paid for it. That's not the point. His voice carried through the quiet diner. The point is you ignored management instructions. Frank spoke up. Rick, come on. Rick turned sharply. I'm running this place, Frank. He turned back to Maya. You're a good worker, he said calmly. But rules are rules. Maya felt the room closing in around her. What are you saying? Rick slid the paper toward her. You're suspended for the rest of the week. The words landed like ice water. Denise gasped softly. For what? Maya asked quietly. For creating liability. Maya stared at him. You're suspending me because I fed a hungry kid? Rick folded his arms. I'm suspending you because you decided the rules didn't apply to you. The diner felt suddenly very small. Frank slammed the spatula onto the counter. That's ridiculous. Rick didn't react. He simply pointed toward the door. You can pick up your final check Friday. Final. The word hung in the air like smoke. Maya blinked. You're firing me? Rick didn't answer. He didn't have to. Denise whispered under her breath. Unbelievable. Maya stood there for a long moment. The diner she had worked in for 3 years suddenly felt like someone else's place. The cracked booths, the smell of coffee, the jar on the counter. She slowly untied her red apron. Frank stepped forward. Maya, don't... It's okay, she said softly. Her voice trembled slightly, but she held her head up. She folded the apron neatly and placed it on the counter. Rick didn't move. Denise looked like she might cry. Maya turned and walked toward the door. The bell rang as she stepped outside. Cold mist touched her face. The street was quieter now. A bus roared past, spraying water along the curb. Across the street, the black sedan still sat parked. Inside it, Daniel Whitmore had seen everything, every word, every expression. The driver glanced toward him. Sir? Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes followed Maya as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She didn't look angry. She looked tired, like someone who had been carrying weight for too long. Maya walked slowly down Jefferson Avenue. Her phone buzzed again. She finally pulled it out. Another message from the hospital billing office. Payment overdue. Her chest tightened. She sat down on a bus stop bench. For the first time that day, her shoulders sagged. Inside the sedan, Daniel Whitmore spoke quietly. She lost her job. Yes, sir. Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on the young woman sitting alone in the cold Detroit afternoon. She wiped her eyes quickly, trying not to cry. Even now, she was trying to stay strong. Daniel exhaled slowly. The driver waited. Finally, Daniel opened the door. I think it's time. The driver looked surprised. You're going to speak to her? Daniel nodded. Yes. He stepped out of the car and adjusted his coat. Across the street, Maya sat on the bench staring at the wet pavement. She didn't notice the older man approaching slowly. The same man she had served breakfast that morning. The same man whose $8 she had given away. Daniel Whitmore stopped a few steps away from her. For a moment, he simply watched. Then he spoke gently. Excuse me. Maya looked up. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, it's you. The old customer. The man from the diner. Daniel gave a small nod. I believe you served me breakfast earlier. Maya forced a polite smile. I did. He looked toward the diner across the street. I saw what happened. Maya looked down quickly. It's fine, she said softly. It was my choice. Daniel studied her face. Most people would have kept the money. She shrugged. Maybe. The mist drifted through the air between them. Daniel reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded bill. Another $8. He held it out to her. I think you dropped this. Maya shook her head gently. No, I didn't. Daniel's eyes softened. For a moment he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. You know, he said, my wife used to say that the smallest acts of kindness reveal the biggest truths about a person. Maya looked at him curiously. Daniel Whitmore folded the bill back into his pocket. And today, he said slowly, you revealed something very rare. Maya frowned slightly. What do you mean? Daniel smiled faintly, but the answer he was about to give her would change everything she thought she knew about that rainy Detroit morning. The misty air along Jefferson Avenue carried the faint smell of wet pavement and distant traffic. Cars passed slowly through shallow puddles, tires hissing against the road. Maya sat on the bus stop bench with her hands folded tightly in her lap. The older man stood in front of her, calm and composed, like someone who had nowhere else he needed to be. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya gave a small, uncertain smile. "I'm sorry if you saw all that," she said quietly. Daniel Whitmore shook his head. "There's nothing to apologize for." He glanced briefly across the street toward the diner. Through the fogged glass windows, Rick Dalton could still be seen moving behind the counter. "Sometimes," Daniel said thoughtfully, "the world reveals itself in very ordinary places." Maya followed his gaze toward the diner. "That place was my job," she said softly. Daniel looked back at her. "And yet you still chose kindness." Maya shrugged a little. "It wasn't a big thing." Daniel studied her face. To him it had been. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded. "Of course." Daniel lowered himself slowly onto the bench beside her. His movements carried the careful patience of someone who had lived a long time and learned not to rush simple moments. For a while, they simply watched the street. A city bus rolled past. A man on a bicycle pedaled through the drizzle. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through the gray afternoon. "You helped that boy without hesitation," Daniel said finally. Maya looked down at the sidewalk. "I know what it's like to be hungry." Daniel turned slightly. "Do you?" She nodded. "When I was younger, my mom worked 2 jobs. Her voice was quiet but steady. Some nights dinner was just toast." Daniel listened carefully. "But she always told me something," Maya continued. "What did she say?" Maya smiled faintly. "She said if life ever gives you enough to share, share." The words hung in the cool air between them. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, because those words felt strangely familiar, almost identical to something his late wife had said many years ago. When he opened his eyes again, Maya was watching a drop of water slide slowly off the edge of the bus shelter roof. "You didn't have to stay," she said suddenly. Daniel looked at her. "Stay?" "At the diner." She gave a small shrug. "You left, but you came back." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's true. Why?" The question was simple, but Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the truth was difficult to explain without sounding strange. "I was curious," he said finally. "About what?" "About whether kindness still existed when no one was watching." Maya frowned slightly. "You mean, like a test?" Daniel didn't respond right away. A few seconds passed. Then he nodded once. "In a way." Maya let out a quiet laugh. "Well, I hope I passed." Daniel looked at her carefully. "You did." Across the street, inside the diner, Rick Dalton leaned against the counter. Through the window he could see Maya sitting at the bus stop, talking to the older man. Rick narrowed his eyes slightly. He didn't like unanswered questions. "Who's that guy?" Denise asked quietly behind him. Rick shrugged. "Probably another customer." But something about the man's posture didn't look ordinary. Across the street, Daniel reached into his coat pocket again. This time he pulled out a small, worn photograph. He held it for a moment before handing it to Maya. "Tell me something," he said. Maya looked down at the picture. It showed a woman standing in front of a small soup kitchen many years ago. She had warm eyes and a gentle smile. Around her were several children holding bowls of food. "Who is she?" Maya asked. "My wife," Daniel said softly. Maya studied the photo again. "She looks kind." Daniel's voice grew quiet. "She was." He took a slow breath. She believed kindness was the only investment that never failed. Maya handed the photo back carefully. I like that. Daniel slipped it back into his coat. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Daniel nodded. So am I. For a moment, the world around them seemed to slow. The rain had nearly stopped now. Clouds shifted slowly above the Detroit skyline. Daniel looked back at the diner once more. Then he turned to Maya again. I have a question for you, he said. Okay. If you suddenly had enough money to fix everything in your life, what would you do first? Maya blinked. The question seemed strange, but she answered honestly. I'd pay for my mom's medicine. Daniel nodded slightly. And after that? Maya thought for a moment. Then she said something that surprised even herself. I'd probably keep working. Daniel tilted his head. You would? She nodded. Helping people feels good. She glanced toward the diner across the street. Even if it doesn't always work out. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. A decision forming quietly. The kind that changes lives. A black car door opened behind them. The driver stepped out and approached slowly. Sir, he said respectfully. Maya turned her head. Daniel stood. Thank you, he said to the driver. Then he turned back to Maya. I should go. Maya nodded politely. Well, it was nice meeting you again. Daniel paused. Then he reached into his pocket one more time. This time he handed her a small white card. Maya looked down at it. It only had a name and a number. Daniel Whitmore. The name meant nothing to her. If you ever need help, he said quietly, call that number. Maya looked up. That's very kind of you, but I'll be okay. Daniel smiled faintly. I know you will. He stepped toward the car, but just before getting inside, he stopped and said something that made Maya blink in confusion. By the way, he added calmly, that $8 tip wasn't random. Maya frowned. What do you mean? Daniel opened the car door. He looked at her one last time. It was a test. And as the black sedan pulled away from the curb, Maya Carter sat on the bench staring at the card in her hand, still unaware that Daniel Whitmore owned half the buildings downtown, still unaware that the test he mentioned was only the first one, and the next one would be far bigger. The black sedan disappeared slowly into the afternoon traffic, its dark shape blending into the gray streets of Detroit. Maya sat on the cold metal bench, the small white card still resting in her hand. Daniel Whitmore. Just a name. Just a phone number. She turned the card over. Nothing on the back. For a moment, she wondered if the entire conversation had been strange. A random man. A random tip. A random test. Detroit traffic roared past the bus stop. People hurried along the sidewalk with umbrellas and grocery bags, and Maya Carter sat there unemployed with a piece of paper she didn't understand. She slipped the card into her jacket pocket. Probably just a nice old man, she murmured to herself. Her stomach growled quietly. The truth hit her again. She had no job. Her phone buzzed in her hand. This time she looked. The message made her chest tighten. Detroit Heart Clinic payment reminder. Overdue balance $842, her mother's medication. The number felt impossible. Maya leaned back against the bus shelter glass and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, the world looked the same. Gray. Busy. Unforgiving. The bus arrived with a loud hiss of brakes. She stood slowly and climbed aboard. The bus driver gave her a tired nod. Afternoon. Afternoon. Maya sat near the window as the city rolled past outside. Brick apartment buildings, corner stores, a mural of jazz musicians painted on a wall along Mack Avenue. Detroit was rough sometimes, but it was home. 20 minutes later, the bus stopped near a quiet block lined with aging duplex houses. Maya stepped off and walked down the sidewalk toward a small blue house with peeling paint. Her house. Well, technically still the bank's house, but for now, it was still theirs. She opened the door quietly. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of peppermint tea and old books. "Maya," a gentle voice called. "I'm home, Mom." Her mother, Evelyn Carter, sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. A small oxygen machine hummed softly beside her. Her smile was warm but tired. "How was work?" The question landed like a stone. Maya forced a smile. It was slow. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to worry her mother either. Evelyn studied her daughter's face. "Maya." That tone meant she knew. Maya sighed and sat down beside her. "I lost the job today." Evelyn didn't react immediately. Instead, she simply reached over and placed a gentle hand on Maya's arm. "What happened?" Maya explained everything quietly. The boy, the meal, Rick Dalton, the firing. By the time she finished, the room felt heavy with silence. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "You did the right thing." Maya blinked. "Mom, I lost my job." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "But you kept your heart." The words warmed Maya more than she expected. "You raised me too well," Maya said softly. Evelyn chuckled weakly. "Or maybe just stubborn." They both laughed quietly. For a moment, the world felt lighter. Then Maya remembered the hospital bill. Her chest tightened again. "I'll find another job," she said quickly. "I always do." Evelyn nodded. "I know you will." The oxygen machine hummed steadily beside the couch. Maya leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Her mind wandered back to the diner, to the rain, to the old man with kind eyes, to the white card in her pocket. She pulled it out slowly. Daniel Whitmore. Her mother glanced at it. "Who's that?" "Just someone I met today." Evelyn studied the name. Something about it stirred a distant memory. "Whitmore," she murmured. Maya shrugged. "He said to call if I ever needed help." Evelyn smiled gently. "And do you?" Maya hesitated. Her pride answered first. "I don't want charity." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Sometimes help isn't charity." Maya looked at the card again. The phone number stared back at her. Across the city, high above downtown Detroit, Daniel Whitmore stood before the large windows of his office tower. The skyline stretched endlessly beneath gray clouds. His driver stepped into the room. "She didn't call." Daniel wasn't surprised. "I didn't expect her to." The driver nodded. "She seems proud." Daniel smiled faintly. "Not proud." He turned slowly toward the window. "Strong." The driver waited. "Do you want us to contact her?" he asked. Daniel shook his head. "No." He looked down toward Jefferson Avenue far below. "The next step has to be her choice." Back in the small blue house, Maya sat quietly at the kitchen table later that evening. The house had grown quiet. Her mother had fallen asleep on the couch. Outside, rain began falling again. Soft at first, then heavier. Maya stared at the white card under the yellow kitchen light. She picked up her phone, then put it down again. "No," she whispered. She stood and walked to the window. Rain slid down the glass. Life had always been a struggle, but she had always managed. Still, the number echoed in her mind. "If you ever need help." She returned to the table, sat down, and finally picked up the phone again. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. Her heart beat faster. "Just to say thank you," she told herself. Nothing more. She slowly dialed the number on the card. Across the city, inside the Whitmore Tower office, Daniel's phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Daniel looked at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but somehow, he already knew who it was. He answered calmly. Hello? For a moment, Maya couldn't speak. Then she said quietly, Hi, this is Maya. Daniel Whitmore smiled slightly, because the second test had just begun, and this one would reveal even more about the woman who gave away $8 she couldn't afford. The rain tapped steadily against the windows of Maya Carter's small kitchen as she held the phone close to her ear. For a second, she wondered if she should hang up. Maybe calling had been a mistake. Maybe the man would think she was asking for money. Her pride tightened in her chest. Hello? The calm voice on the other end of the line made her freeze. It was him, Daniel Whitmore. Hi, this is Maya, she said carefully. Across the city, inside his quiet office high above Detroit, Daniel Whitmore leaned back slightly in his chair. The skyline behind him glowed faintly through the rain. I know, he said gently. Maya blinked. You do? Daniel smiled. I was hoping you might call. That answer surprised her. She cleared her throat. I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For the conversation earlier. Her voice was steady but humble. You didn't have to talk to me. Daniel studied the dark city through the tall glass windows. Sometimes conversations matter more than we realize. Maya hesitated. I also wanted to tell you something. Daniel listened quietly. I didn't call because I need money, she said quickly. Daniel chuckled softly. I didn't think you did. That answer eased something inside her. I just didn't want you to think I was ignoring you. You weren't. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then Daniel spoke again. Tell me something, Maya. Okay. If you had the chance to help someone again tomorrow, but it meant making your life harder, would you still do it? The question came suddenly. Maya frowned slightly. That sounds like another test. Daniel didn't deny it. Maybe. Maya leaned back in the kitchen chair. Her mother's oxygen machine hummed softly in the living room. Rain continued sliding down the windows. I think life gives us tests all the time, she said slowly. And sometimes the right answer still hurts. Daniel smiled. That's a very honest answer. Maya hesitated. Why are you asking me these questions? Daniel turned toward his desk. Several documents sat neatly stacked beside him. Photos, reports, information his team had gathered in only a few hours. He could see everything now. Maya Carter, age 27, waitress, caregiver. Years of small acts of kindness recorded by people who barely remembered telling the stories. Daniel closed the folder. I'm asking, he said calmly, because I have something I'd like you to do tomorrow. Maya blinked. What kind of thing? A job. Her heart skipped. I told you earlier, she said quickly. I'm not looking for charity. This isn't charity. Then what is it? Daniel leaned forward slightly. A chance. Maya didn't answer immediately. Doing what? There's a community shelter on the east side of the city. She recognized the name instantly. It was one of the roughest parts of Detroit. Daniel continued. They're having trouble keeping volunteers. Maya frowned. That place is overwhelmed. Yes. Why are you calling me about it? Daniel's voice remained calm. Because I want to see what happens when someone like you walks into a place like that. Maya sat quietly. The request felt strange. You want me to volunteer? For one day. Maya looked toward the living room where her mother slept. "I need a job," she said gently. Daniel's voice softened. "And sometimes the door to a job doesn't look like a job at first." She didn't know what to say. "Why me?" Daniel stood and walked slowly toward the large window overlooking Detroit. Because he knew something she didn't. Something about the shelter. Something about the people connected to it. "Because you already passed the first test," he said. "And the second? That depends on what you choose tomorrow." Maya stared at the kitchen table. Helping people had always been simple for her. But now everything felt different. Because now someone was watching, testing, judging. "I don't like being tested," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Neither do I. But life does it anyway." The rain outside softened. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Finally, Maya spoke again. "What time?" Daniel smiled. 10 in the morning." "And where?" "I'll send the address." Maya took a slow breath. "Okay." Daniel paused. "One more thing." "What?" "Don't tell them I sent you." Maya raised an eyebrow. "So this is definitely a test." Daniel's voice carried a trace of warmth. "Maybe." They ended the call shortly after. Maya sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the phone. Part of her felt nervous. Part of her felt curious. And part of her felt strangely hopeful. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood quietly in his office. His driver entered the room. "She called?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." "And?" Daniel turned slowly toward the window. "She accepted." The driver looked surprised. "So, tomorrow?" Daniel's voice was calm. "Tomorrow we find out if her kindness survives when things become difficult." The driver nodded. "You think it will?" Daniel thought back to the diner. The jar. The soaked teenager. The $5 she couldn't afford to give away. "I don't think," he said softly. "I know." Back in the small blue house, Maya Carter turned off the kitchen light. The rain had nearly stopped. Tomorrow she would wake up without a chum. Without certainty. Without a plan. But she would still show up somewhere to help people. Because that was simply who she was, and neither Maya nor Daniel Whitmore had any idea that the place she was going tomorrow would reveal a secret far bigger than either of them expected. The next morning, Detroit woke slowly beneath a pale gray sky. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets damp and shining in the early light. Maya Carter stood at the corner bus stop with her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. The cold morning air brushed against her face as she waited. In the distance, the bus approached with its familiar rumble. She still wasn't sure what she was doing. Helping at a shelter wasn't unusual for her. She had volunteered before when the diner closed early on Sundays. But this time felt different. Because someone was watching. Someone powerful enough to turn a simple act of kindness into a test. The bus door opened with a soft hiss. "Morning," the driver said. "Morning." Maya sat near the middle of the bus as it rolled through Detroit's east side. The buildings grew older, the sidewalks rougher, the neighborhoods quieter. Paint peeled from brick walls. Corner stores had bars over the windows. A few stray dogs wandered near an empty lot. Finally, the bus slowed beside a weathered building with a faded sign above the door. Madison Community Shelter. Maya stepped off the bus. The building looked tired but alive. People moved in and out through the front entrance. Families carrying bags, elderly men warming their hands with paper coffee cups. Inside, the shelter smelled of soup and cleaning detergent. A woman behind the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "Hi," Maya said. "I'm here to volunteer." The woman blinked. "Today?" "Yes. We weren't expecting anyone." Maya smiled gently. "That's okay." The woman studied her for a moment. Then she pointed toward the back hallway. Kitchen's that way. The kitchen buzzed with quiet activity. Large pots simmered on the stove. Volunteers chopped vegetables at a long metal counter. A tall man with salt and pepper hair looked up as Maya walked in. "You knew?" he asked. "Yes." He wiped his hands on a towel. "I'm Harold." "Maya." "Well, Maya," he said with a warm smile, "grab an apron. We can always use another pair of hands." Maya stepped into the rhythm of the kitchen quickly. She chopped onions, stirred soup, carried trays of bread to the serving counter. The hours passed quietly. But what struck her most were the people. A father sitting with his young daughter, trying to make her laugh. An elderly woman wrapping her hands around a bowl of soup like it was the warmest thing in the world. A teenage boy she recognized. The same boy from the diner. He froze when he saw her. "You?" Maya smiled. "Looks like we both came back for breakfast." The boy laughed softly. He sat down with a bowl of soup. Across the room, Harold leaned toward Maya. "You know him?" "He stopped by the diner yesterday." Harold nodded slowly. "Most of the kids here bounce between places." Maya felt a quiet ache in her chest. She served meals for the next hour, helping people, talking to strangers, doing the simple work she had always loved. But something strange began to happen. People in the shelter started whispering. At first, Maya didn't notice, but Harold did. He glanced toward the entrance, then toward Maya. "That's odd," he muttered. "What is?" Harold wiped his hands again. "We usually don't get visitors like that." Maya turned. At the entrance of the shelter stood two men in dark suits. They weren't volunteers, they weren't homeless, and they clearly didn't belong in the small community building. One of them spoke quietly to the woman at the front desk. The other scanned the room. His eyes landed on Maya. He nodded slightly. Then both men walked toward the kitchen. Maya froze. Harold looked confused. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked. One of the men smiled politely. "We're just here to observe." "Observe what?" The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at Maya. "Ms. Carter?" Maya blinked. "Yes?" The man nodded respectfully. "Mr. Whitmore asked us to stop by." Maya felt a ripple of realization. Daniel Whitmore. This was part of the test. The man continued. "Please continue what you're doing." Maya frowned slightly. "You're watching?" "In a manner of speaking." Harold crossed his arms. "What kind of operation is this?" The man smiled again. "Just a little evaluation." Maya suddenly felt very aware of everything she did. How she spoke. How she moved. How she helped people. But after a few minutes, something surprising happened. She forgot they were there, because a woman with tired eyes walked in holding a small child, because a man near the door needed help carrying trays, because kindness was easier when she wasn't thinking about it. The suited men stood quietly along the wall for nearly 2 hours, watching, taking notes, observing every moment. Finally, they stepped outside. One of them made a phone call. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore answered immediately. "Well?" he asked. The man looked through the shelter window. Maya was kneeling beside a little girl tying the child's shoe. "She's exactly what you thought," the man said. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Good." The man hesitated. "There's something else." "What?" The man's voice lowered. "She hasn't taken a break once." Daniel smiled faintly. Back inside the shelter, Maya wiped her hands and leaned against the counter for a moment. Harold walked over. "Those guys weird you out too?" "A little." "You know who they work for?" Maya shook her head. "No idea." Harold chuckled softly. "Well, whoever sent them must think you're special." Maya laughed. "I'm just chopping vegetables." But outside the shelter, the suited man ended the call and looked through the window again. Because what he had just witnessed wasn't ordinary. Not in a city where kindness often came with conditions. And somewhere deep in Daniel Whitmore's office tower, a decision was beginning to form. A decision that would soon turn Maya Carter's quiet life completely upside down. The afternoon sun struggled through thin gray clouds as the activity inside Madison Community Shelter slowly began to settle. Empty soup bowls stacked beside the sink. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the back room. Maya Carter wiped down the long stainless steel counter with a damp cloth. Her arms were tired, but the exhaustion felt good, the kind that came after helping people. Harold walked past, carrying a box of bread. "You ever worked in kitchens before?" he asked. Maya smiled. 3 years in a diner. "That explains it," Harold said. "You move like someone who knows chaos." Maya laughed softly. Across the room, the teenage boy from the diner waved before heading toward the exit with a small food bag. "See you around," he called. "Take care," Maya replied. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful. Then the front door of the shelter opened again. The room grew strangely quiet. Maya looked up. An older man stepped inside slowly. His coat was dark and elegant, the kind of clothing that didn't belong in places like this. But his face was unmistakable. Daniel Whitmore. Maya blinked. "You came." Daniel smiled faintly. "I said I might." The volunteers nearby glanced at each other, sensing something unusual. Harold approached. "Can I help you, sir?" Daniel extended a polite hand. "Daniel Whitmore." Harold shook it. "Harold Jenkins." Daniel nodded toward Maya. "I believe she's helping you today." Harold looked between them. "You two know each other?" "Just recently," Daniel said. Maya wiped her hands on a towel and walked over. "So, this was the place," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes." "And the guys in suits?" "Mine." Maya folded her arms slightly. "You're really serious about these tests." Daniel looked around the shelter slowly. Families sitting together, volunteers cleaning tables, a little girl drawing with crayons on the corner of a table. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." Maya studied him carefully. "Why?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly through the room. His eyes lingered on the worn floors, the aging walls, the crowded tables. "This place," he said finally, "was started by my wife." Maya's expression softened. "The woman in the photo." Daniel nodded. "She believed nobody should ever feel invisible." He paused beside the serving counter. "For 20 years she worked here every week." Maya looked around the shelter with new eyes. "And after she passed?" she asked gently. Daniel's voice grew quieter. "I stopped coming." The words carried regret. "For 3 years." Maya said nothing. Sometimes silence was the best way to hold someone's pain. Daniel continued walking slowly through the shelter. "I told myself the world had changed," he said. "That kindness was rare." He turned toward Maya. "So I decided to test it." Maya tilted her head. "With the $8 tip?" "Yes." "And the shelter today?" "Yes." Maya sighed softly. "You know, people usually don't like being experiments." Daniel smiled faintly. "True, but sometimes experiments reveal truth." Harold watched the exchange with growing curiosity. Finally, he asked the obvious question. "Mr. Whitmore, what exactly are you testing?" Daniel turned slowly toward the kitchen. He looked at Maya for a long moment. Then he spoke calmly. "I'm searching for someone." The room grew quiet again. "Someone to run this place." Harold blinked. "Run the shelter?" Daniel nodded. "My wife left a foundation when she passed." Maya frowned slightly. You mean, you fund this place? Daniel gave a small nod. For now. Maya looked around the room again. The building suddenly felt different. What does that have to do with me? She asked. Daniel stepped closer. Because the last 3 years have been difficult for the shelter. Harold lowered his eyes. Donations had fallen. Volunteers came and went. Keeping the doors open had become a struggle. Daniel continued. I need someone who believes in what this place stands for. Maya blinked. You're not serious. I am. You barely know me. Daniel smiled slightly. Actually, I know quite a bit. He nodded toward the suited men standing quietly near the entrance. They've been watching. Maya raised an eyebrow. That's a little creepy. Daniel chuckled softly. Fair. Maya looked down at her hands, the same hands that had chopped vegetables all morning. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully, I'm a waitress. Daniel shook his head. You're more than that. Maya laughed awkwardly. I just lost my job yesterday. Daniel's eyes softened. I know. She looked up sharply. You know? Daniel nodded. I know about the diner. The boy you fed. The $5 you gave away. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. That wasn't supposed to be impressive. Daniel's voice remained calm. But it was. Harold crossed his arms thoughtfully. You're saying you want her to run the shelter? Daniel nodded once. As director. The room fell silent. Maya stared at him. You can't be serious. Daniel's voice was steady. I am. She shook her head. I don't have a college degree. That's fine. I've never managed anything like this. That can be learned. Maya looked around the shelter again. The families, the volunteers, the people who depended on this place. Her chest tightened. Why me? She asked quietly. Daniel answered without hesitation. Because when nobody was watching, you chose kindness. Maya didn't know what to say. The world seemed to tilt slightly. The rain had stopped outside. Sunlight began to break through the clouds, casting warm light across the shelter windows. And for the first time since losing her job, hope flickered inside Maya Carter's chest. But the next thing Daniel Whitmore said would make the entire room gasp. Daniel Whitmore looked around the shelter one more time. The worn tables, the faded paint on the walls, the quiet line of people waiting for dinner trays. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he turned back to Maya Carter. And if you accept, he said calmly, the Whitmore Foundation will invest $20 million to rebuild this entire place. The room went completely silent. Even the clatter of dishes in the kitchen stopped. Harold blinked. 20 million? One of the volunteers nearly dropped a tray. Maya stared at Daniel like she had misheard him. That can't be real, she said quietly. Daniel didn't smile. I assure you it is. Maya felt her heart beating faster. You're talking about rebuilding the shelter? Not just rebuilding. Daniel gestured toward the building. A new facility. Medical services. Job training programs. Housing support. Education spaces for children. The words sounded unreal. This neighborhood deserves more than survival, Daniel said. It deserves opportunity. Harold slowly sat down at a nearby chair. Good Lord. Maya ran a hand through her hair. You're offering all that to me? Daniel shook his head gently. I'm offering it to this community. He looked directly at her. But someone has to lead it. The volunteers whispered among themselves. One of the suited men stepped closer. Mr. Whitmore has been planning this expansion for years, he explained. But he refused to begin without the right person. Harold looked at Maya. Well, looks like he found her. Maya felt the weight of every eye in the room. Her chest tightened. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Daniel tilted his head. Why? I'm not a director. You could be. I'm not a business leader. You could learn. I'm just someone who serves breakfast. Daniel smiled softly. And that's exactly the point. Maya frowned. What do you mean? Daniel stepped closer. My wife believed leadership begins with service. He glanced toward the long kitchen counter. You fed people today. You listened to them. You treated everyone in this room like they mattered. His voice remained steady. That's leadership. Maya shook her head slowly. You're asking me to run a multi-million-dollar foundation. Daniel nodded. Yes. That's insane. A few people chuckled quietly, but Daniel remained serious. No, he said. What's insane is how rare kindness has become. He folded his hands behind his back. I've spent the last 3 years meeting candidates with perfect resumes. MBA graduates, corporate executives, nonprofit managers. None of them passed the test. Maya crossed her arms. So instead you choose a waitress. Daniel's voice was calm. I choose someone who gave away $8 she needed. Harold nodded slowly. Hard to argue with that. Maya looked around the shelter again. The boy from the diner had returned with a few friends. They watched quietly from the doorway. The little girl drawing with crayons looked up at Maya with curious eyes. Maya felt a sudden lump in her throat. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's a fair answer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. Then he placed it gently on the table beside them. This is the proposal. Maya glanced down. The paper was thick, official. Whitmore Foundation Community Initiative, $20 million. Director, Maya Carter. Her breath caught. Daniel stepped back. You don't have to answer today. Maya looked up. How long do I have? Daniel smiled faintly. As long as you need. Harold stood and walked beside Maya. He leaned closer and whispered quietly. Kid, do you realize what you could do here? Maya's eyes scanned the shelter again. Broken chairs, a leaking ceiling tile near the back, a line of families waiting patiently for food. The place was struggling, but it was also alive. She turned to Daniel. Why are you trusting me with something this big? Daniel's eyes softened. Because my wife would have. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the clouds finally broke apart. Sunlight spilled through the shelter windows, filling the room with warm afternoon light. For a moment, Maya Carter stood in the center of a decision that could change everything. Not just for her, but for hundreds of people. She looked down at the document again. $20 million. A foundation. A chance to help an entire community. And suddenly, the memory of the diner returned. The jar. The $8. The hungry boy. She looked up slowly. Daniel Whitmore waited patiently. He wasn't rushing her. He never had. Because he already believed he knew the answer. But the next words Maya Carter spoke would decide the future of the entire Madison Community Shelter. The room remained completely still. Sunlight streamed through the tall shelter windows, catching dust particles in the air like tiny stars. Maya Carter stared at the proposal on the table. $20 million. Her name printed beside the word director. It didn't feel real. Just yesterday, she had been wiping down diner tables and worrying about an overdue hospital bill. Now an entire building full of people was waiting for her answer. Harold stood nearby with his arms crossed, trying not to look too hopeful. The volunteers whispered quietly among themselves. Even the little girl with the crayons had stopped drawing. Daniel Whitmore simply waited. His calm patience filled the room. Finally, Maya took a slow breath. She looked up at Daniel. "If I say yes," she asked carefully, "what happens next?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "We start rebuilding immediately." He gestured toward the shelter around them. New kitchens, medical rooms, job training classrooms, scholarship programs for kids, affordable housing partnerships. Harold let out a low whistle. "That's more than rebuilding." Daniel nodded. "It's a second chance for this neighborhood." Maya listened quietly. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her chest. "What if I fail?" she asked. Daniel smiled gently. "You will." The room blinked in surprise. Maya raised an eyebrow. "That's encouraging." Daniel chuckled softly. "Every leader fails. What matters is whether they stand back up." Maya looked down again at the document. Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper. "I've never managed millions of dollars." Daniel leaned against the table. "You managed something far harder yesterday." Maya frowned. "What?" "You chose kindness when life was already difficult." His voice carried calm certainty. "Money can't teach that." The words lingered in the room. Harold nodded slowly. "He's got a point." Maya felt the tension in her shoulders slowly soften. She looked toward the doorway. The teenage boy from the diner stood there quietly, watching. The same boy she had bought breakfast for. He gave her a small nod, like he already believed in her. That moment did something inside her. Maya turned back to Daniel Whitmore. "If I do this," she said slowly, "it can't be about me." Daniel nodded. "Good. This place belongs to the people here." Daniel nodded again. "Even better. And nobody gets turned away because they're broke." Daniel smiled. "That rule came from my wife." Maya finally allowed herself a small laugh. "I like your wife." "So did I." The room waited again. The decision had reached its final moment. Maya Carter straightened slightly. Then she said the words that would echo through the shelter for years to come. "I'll do it." For a second, no one moved. Then Harold let out a loud laugh. "Well, I'll be—" Applause broke out across the room. Volunteers clapped. Someone cheered. The teenage boy grinned widely. Maya felt her face warm. Daniel Whitmore extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, Director Carter." She shook it. The handshake felt steady, real. But as the excitement settled, Maya's thoughts drifted somewhere else. Back to the diner, back to the jar, back to the $8. She looked up at Daniel again. "There's one thing I still don't understand." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Why $8? Daniel chuckled quietly. "I was wondering when you'd ask." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded note. It looked old. The paper had softened with age. He handed it to her. Maya unfolded it slowly. Inside were simple words written in careful handwriting. "Kindness begins with the smallest gift you can give." Maya looked up. "My wife wrote that," Daniel said. $8 was the first tip I ever left her." Maya blinked. "She was a waitress?" Daniel nodded. "Exactly like you." The room grew quiet again. "And one day," Daniel continued, "she used that tip to buy a sandwich for someone else." Maya felt chills rise along her arms. "She didn't know I saw it," he said. "But that moment changed my life." Daniel looked around the shelter slowly. "And now," he said softly, "it's changing this place." Sunlight flooded through the windows as clouds drifted away from the Detroit sky. For the first time in years, Madison Community Shelter felt full of possibility. But outside the building, someone else was watching. A familiar figure stood across the street beside a parked car. Rick Dalton. The former diner manager squinted through the shelter window. He recognized Maya immediately. But when he saw Daniel Whitmore shaking her hand, his expression slowly changed, because Rick Dalton had just realized something shocking. The waitress he fired yesterday was now connected to one of the richest men in the entire state. And the story of the $8 tip was far from over. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across Madison Community Shelter, warming the old brick walls with a soft golden glow. Inside, the energy had changed. Volunteers moved faster. People smiled more easily. Even the air felt lighter. Maya Carter stood near the kitchen window, holding the proposal Daniel Whitmore had given her. The paper still felt unreal in her hands. Director Carter. She quietly shook her head. Harold approached with 2 cups of coffee. "One for the boss," he said, handing her one. Maya laughed. "Please don't start that." Harold leaned against the counter. "You just secured $20 million for this place." "I didn't do anything yet." "You said yes," Harold replied. "That's everything." Across the room, Daniel Whitmore stood speaking with several volunteers. He listened more than he talked, nodding as they explained the shelter's needs. For the first time in years, the future of the building didn't feel uncertain. Maya watched him quietly. Then she walked over. "Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel turned. "Daniel is fine." "Daniel," she corrected with a small smile, "I have another question." "I suspected you might." Maya held up the folded note he had given her earlier. "The one your wife wrote." Daniel nodded. "She really believed that?" "Every word." Maya looked around the shelter again. Families sitting together. Children laughing. The teenage boy from the diner helping stack chairs. "She would have liked this place today," Maya said softly. Daniel followed her gaze. "She would have loved it." For a moment they stood quietly in the golden light. Then Maya said something unexpected. "I want to keep the jar." Daniel blinked. "The jar?" "The free meal fund." Daniel smiled slowly. "That little jar started everything." "Exactly," Maya said. She turned toward Harold. "Can we put one here?" Harold grinned. "Already thinking like a director." He walked into the kitchen and returned with a clean glass jar. Maya took a marker and wrote carefully across the side, "Free meal fund." She placed it on the counter near the serving line. Daniel studied it with quiet amusement. "You know," he said, "that jar could get expensive." Maya shrugged. "Kindness usually is." Daniel laughed softly. A small crowd had gathered near the counter now. Curious volunteers. Shelter guests. Even the teenage boy from the diner stepped closer. Maya reached into her pocket. She pulled out the last 3 coins the boy had given her yesterday. She dropped them into the jar. The soft clink echoed in the quiet room. "That's the first donation," she said. The teenage boy grinned. "Guess I helped start it." "You did," Maya said. Harold stepped forward and placed $5 inside. Second, one of the volunteers added $1. Another person added 2. Within seconds, the jar began filling. Daniel Whitmore watched the scene quietly. Then he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out his wallet. From it, he removed a crisp bill. He held it up for a moment. $8. Exactly 8. He folded the bills together and dropped them gently into the jar. The sound made several people smile. "Seems appropriate," Daniel said. Maya laughed softly. "Full circle." Daniel nodded. "Full circle." Outside, the sun lowered toward the Detroit skyline, casting long shadows across the street. Across the road, Rick Dalton still stood beside his car. He watched everything through the shelter window. The volunteers, the applause, the handshake, the jar filling with donations, and Maya Carter standing in the middle of it all. Rick shook his head slowly. He had fired her without a second thought. Now the same woman was leading a multi-million-dollar community project. He climbed into his car and drove away quietly. Some mistakes, he realized too late, couldn't be undone. Inside the shelter, Maya stood beside the counter watching the jar slowly fill. She turned to Daniel. "You know something?" "What's that?" "That $8 tip didn't really test me." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "No." Maya shook her head. "It tested whether kindness still spreads." Daniel considered that. Then he nodded. "I think we just got the answer." The room buzzed with conversation as people began planning new ideas for the shelter's future. New programs, new rooms, new hope. But Maya Carter stood quietly for a moment longer. Her thoughts drifted back to the rainy morning at the diner. The jar, the boy, the old man by the window. One small decision. $8 she couldn't afford to give away. And somehow, that tiny act had grown into something far bigger than money. Far bigger than a test. It had reminded an entire room of strangers that kindness still mattered. Daniel Whitmore glanced at Maya one last time. "You passed every test," he said quietly. Maya smiled. "I wasn't trying to pass anything." "I know." That was exactly why she had. Outside, the last light of day faded over Detroit. Inside Madison Community Shelter, laughter filled the room. And on the counter, beneath warm kitchen lights, a simple glass jar held a few coins, a few bills, and one quiet reminder. Sometimes the smallest gift changes everything. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share where you're watching from. And here's something simple. If you believe kindness still matters in this world, just comment 1 below. If you think small acts like an $8 tip can change someone's life. Comment 8. I read the comments every day, and I'd love to see how many people out there still believe in kindness. And if this story meant something to you, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more powerful, and you won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.